Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video games deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. My guest today is a friend of the show, one host of Gamerheads podcast, and he jumped out of the art book on my shelf to join us for the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Roger Reichardt.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Can I just say something? First of all, I love your podcast.
Thank you.
Secondly, you have the best podcast voice in all the podcasts. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. Like I could sit there and listen to your podcast all day. You have such a great voice.
I'm going to credit that to a nice microphone, but I appreciate it very much.
How do I get one of those mics? That's my question.
Yeah. So it's good to have you on the show today. We've been, chatting around in Discord servers and stuff for a while, so it's good to have you here. And we've got an interesting conversation ahead of us today. We're going to talk about the Plucky Squire, which is an adventure game developed by All Possible Futures and published by Devolver Digital for contemporary consoles and PC in 2024. The Plucky Squire was directed by James Turner and Jonathan Biddle, produced by Kitty Crawford. And if this is your first time listening to the show, here's how spoilers work on the podcast. And thank you for stopping by. If this is your first time here, welcome. We're happy to have you here. Special episode today. No spoiler section in today's podcast. We chatted back and forth, Roger and I, and we decided this game's story is basically a children's story, a fairy tale, and a spoiler section in this podcast would basically just be like, remember when this happened in the plot? I didn't come out of this with themes or anything that I really wanted to dig into. This is a very simple story, and we'll talk about, how we feel about that in a little bit, but no spoiler section in today's episode. We're not going to go out of our way to spoil what happens at the end of the story in case anyone is, curious, but we're not going to have that separate section. So, I've said this before, but might be a shorter episode on the podcast today. Famous last words.
That's right.
What is the Plucky Squire? We have some elevator pitches for the top of the show here. I say this is a charming and beautiful children's storybook come to life. Roger, what's the pitch?
I have a fun family game that is geared for a younger audience.
Yeah, there we go. Exactly. And we'll definitely talk about that stuff in a little bit. I think that the fact that it is a game that is geared toward a younger audience caught a lot of people by surprise when this game came out, I think. So real quick, I played this on PS5. It took 7.5 hours to beat. Roger, where did you play this? How long did it take you?
Yeah, so I saw that in the notes that it only took you 7.5 hours. And I played it on the Switch, and it took me 15 hours to beat this game. And I'm like, how did I spend 15 hours in this game? I think part of it was in the beginning, I was trying to find all the art and trying to collect all the little characters. Like there's this little character. So I was trying to do all the collecting. And then towards the end, I was like, I don't care. I just want to get through this game. So
yeah. Didn't you say at the beginning of the game you were playing with your kid too?
They were watching, but they weren't.
Oh, they were watching.
Playing.
Okay. Yeah. I played an opening chapter with my wife who doesn't play games at all. And she took the sticks for a while and played. So this is a game that I think is quite good, like kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but quite good to play with either kids or somebody who doesn't play a lot of games. If you're looking for like something you can pass the controller or something like that, and everyone can kind of have a good time swinging the sword around, solving some puzzles and stuff like that.
No, I agree. I think when I was playing it, and we can get into this later, but I was expecting something different. And by the end, I was like, okay, this is a game for like my 9-year-old so that he can get his feet wet into like adventure action games like this.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Let's rewind a little bit. Let's talk about what brought us to the Plucky Squire in the first place. And this was for a lot of people, one of the more hotly anticipated games from 2024. So was it the same for you? Were you looking forward to it? What was it that drew you to playing this? And what was it? I mean, when we talked about having you on the podcast, I think we arrived at this game pretty quickly. So what was it that made you want to play?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I think it was on like a Nintendo Direct or some kind of thing like a Nintendo Direct where I saw the game and I was just blown away by the fact that you can jump into the book and jump out of the
Hmm.
book. The art looked just fantastic, and I knew I wanted to play it. And when you reached out to me, we talked about different games, and we landed on the Plucky Squire. This was one of the games too that I participate in the Indie Informer Fantasy Game Critic
Hmm.
League,
Yeah.
and this was my first pick. This was my very first pick in that draft because I was super excited, and I thought this game is just gonna take the world by storm because of how
Yeah.
awesome this game is. And eh,
Yeah. Shout out to the Indian Informer, friends of the podcast here, and good people over there at the Indian Informer. Yeah, I remember seeing this in a showcase too, and like, I, you know, you and I, we play a lot of video games. We watch a lot of showcases. We watch a lot of trailers. Like, I don't get wowed by things I see in trailers that often anymore. But the Plucky Squire, like when it started out with the 2D thing, and I was like, oh, that's cool. You're playing inside of a storybook. Look, that's pretty cute. And then you jump out of the book and it's this beautifully realized 3D, like Toy Story world. That legitimately got a like, wow, that looks amazing out of me during a trailer. So
yeah.
from that first time I saw it, I was really, really excited for it. And then Devolver Digital is kind of like pretty trustworthy with the games that they pick. I don't play everything that they publish and I don't like everything that I play from them, but I know that they pick interesting games to
Hmm.
put their backing behind. So when you see Devolver, it's almost like the old Nintendo seal of quality. Like when you see Devolver, you're like, that's going to be interesting. At least I should at least put this on a wish list, follow up with it. So those two things, but it really was just like seeing 30 seconds of a trailer. I was like, oh, the Plucky Squire, I'm going to play this. And like anytime I ever did a podcast talking about my most anticipated games of the year or anything like that, the Plucky Squire was always on there because I was just waiting for it to see what it would be.
Yeah.
And to do our like quick opening thoughts at the top of the show here, I like this game. I'm just going to say that straight out. I had a good time with this, but I think that this game is a victim of not marketing itself as what it really is. I think that a lot of people had the wrong expectations through no fault of their own that this was going to be something that it's not. What it is it is a children's game. And
Hmm.
when I say a children's game, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean this is a very simple, easy game with a very straightforward story and cute graphics and, fun, charming music and simple characters that is perfect for kids. I mean, that's what this game is. And so that was not, I don't want to say that's not how it was marketed, but that was not how they presented it, if that makes sense. They didn't hide the fact that it's a game for kids or like a super simple game that you can just like you just chill. You can just vibe and play this game with very little friction at all. It's not like they said that's the game that this is, but they didn't fully put that out that like this is what it is, right? And then I also think that when you see the Devolver Digital logo, you expect something edgy, or at least I do. And this
Hmm.
is one of the least edgy games I think I've ever played. So it is once your expectations are in check, and like when we say keep your expectations in check, usually we say that for like a game that's, the 7 out of 10 or whatever, because like it's kind of okay. It's got some cool ideas, but it's not a great game, right? I don't really mean that when I say that for the Plucky Squire. I say keep your expectations in check because this is a game that feels like it was made for kids. And once you get in that mindset, and for me personally, once I brought myself to the level that the game is playing on, I had a good time. I really enjoyed just like chilling out playing this game. I play a lot of difficult games from time to time, and every now and then I like to just play something that's very frictionless and enjoy the graphics and the music and stuff like that. And I had a good time with this. How about you?
Yeah, I think my expectations were much different going into this game because it was a Devolver published game. I also thought this was going to be something different than it was.
Yeah.
And I think I started to realize that it wasn't it wasn't what I thought it was when there was a lot of moments where it's like you're presented a puzzle, and then like the moment you're presented a puzzle, they tell you how to solve it.
Uh-huh.
And I was very disappointed by that. Again, I'm in the same boat. Like I play a lot of difficult games, so it is nice to have like a palate cleanser or something a little bit easier. But I felt
Mm-hmm.
like this was too easy, and yeah, I think it was an issue with marketing because I don't feel like it was. I feel like it should have been marketed to a younger audience, and I don't know if they marketed it to you. Again, part of being Devolver, like I don't know if they market to younger audiences either. Like I don't think that
Right.
that's like their wheelhouse. So it was kind of weird. I also played on a Switch. I will say the game crashed on me a couple times.
Yeah. I can see this game not doing well on Switch.
I know. I debated if I should have bought it for a PC or the Switch. At the time, I was laid up in bed after surgery, so I was like, "Well, I'm going to play on the Switch because
Mm-hmm.
you know I'm can't go anywhere." And yeah, so I think that partly played a little bit into my feeling for the game, but
Yeah.
overall, I wouldn't say it's a bad game. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but I was expecting a deeper uh, story,
Yeah.
something that had more meat to it and more meaning to it. And it is just a kid's story, like you said. I mean, and that's saying that just, but it is. I thought there was gonna be something more to it, and there wasn't.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like when we talk about how the game was marketed, you know, a Nintendo Direct is not a bad place to market a game for a younger audience. Nintendo's all about the family friendly stuff. I think it really just comes down to, for a lot of people, and myself included, when I see that Devolver is publishing a game, I'm expecting something subversive or
Yes.
edgy or something like that. And this is just not that. So, like, maybe Devolver wanted to have something different, maybe wanted to put themselves behind this cool idea, even though it's not really in line with the stuff that they normally publish. And I just think that got people into the wrong sort of expectation for what it is, which is it's just an interesting result. And I don't necessarily blame anybody for it on either side. It's just like that's the way it played out. I did like I did have the benefit of reading all like the reviews at release that basically said a lot of the stuff that we already said. And so I did go into it with the mindset that I know what this game is. I'm ready to engage with it on that level, right? Whereas, had I gotten a review code for it, it would have caught me by surprise a little bit more, I think. So
Yeah.
I definitely understand that.
I didn't read any reviews, and that's interesting because I just wanted to go into this game blind, and you just look at other games that are cute that Devolver published, like I think of Cult of the Lamb, which looks like a
Yeah.
kid's game.
But very much not in
Yeah.
subject matter. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's moments where I thought they're going to lean into like a Toy Story type story, that there'd be more
Yeah.
meaning behind it. And maybe I thought, okay, this is the moment it's going to pull at my heartstrings, right? This is going to be the moment I'm like, oh, but this happened, and oh my goodness. And there was none of that. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to spoil it, but there's even characters you run into that you're like, that's who the big surprise character was? Really?
Uh-huh.
So it just, again, it's not a bad game. I wish that I knew what I was getting into. And
Yeah.
again, marketing.
Yeah, for sure. And people can start to see why there's not going to be a spoiler section in the podcast, because it's just very straightforward at the end of the day. So let's take a little music break. We will come back. We'll set up the story. We'll talk about our thoughts about that. We'll also talk about all those other parts, like what it's like to play the game, and of course how it looks and sounds. The Plucky Squire has a writing credit to James Turner, and in The Plucky Squire, you play as Jot, who is the eponymous Plucky Squire. In the game, he is a hero within the world that he lives in. So, Jot is this hero inside of a storybook that is inside of the greater world, the 3D world, if you've seen the trailers and stuff like that. So he is a hero at many levels throughout the game. He's the hero of the game. He's the hero in his world. He's the hero of books within his world. Someone should promote him to knight already. Why is he still a squire? I don't really understand.
Because the game's too easy. That's why. That's why he's
he hasn't earned it yet. Yeah, it's just too easy. Yeah. So one quick thing about the book. So you're going to be playing through a storybook. That's where most of the game takes place. The storybook is titled The Plucky Squire, and you have voice narration, as the book has a kind of narrator. That voice is done by Philip Bretherton. I love the voice of the narrator. He's fantastic. He's really witty and very fitting for a kind of like snappy, charming children's story. I thought he was great.
Mm-hmm. I did too. I loved the voiceover, and there is a part where I don't think this is a spoiler, but like the story kind of turns, right?
Yeah, takes a dark turn.
Takes a dark turn
for this game. For this game's version of a dark turn.
Yeah, that's right. and he becomes snarky right towards the hero, which is I loved it. I thought that was great. I thought that was one of the shining elements of the game was the voice acting in this, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the majority of the voice acting right there, is just the narrator. In the book, The Plucky Squire, the book within the game, right? The antagonist in that world is this evil wizard named Hump Grump, who is the person who's always thwarted by Jot in all the stories. So if Jot is the Harlem Globetrotters, Hump Grump is the Washington Generals, just eating shit all the time. And he gets tired of it. So the kind of inciting event in here is that Hump Grump figures out this sort of like meta magic that can change the stories in the storybook and physically kick Jot out of the book. So he kicks Jot out of the world, literally out of the world. And while Jot is out, he fucks up the entire world and remakes it in his image. And it's disgusting. And it was this beautiful, colorful fantasy world before. And he introduces all of these machines of war and stuff like that. So that's the inciting event. So the story proceeds. Hump Grump's magic can kind of shape reality to whatever he wants. So Jot needs to find a way to, first of all, get back into the book. But then once he does, how to get around this magic and rewrite the story so that we can get back towards that happy ending track. And so that's the setup for the story. What did you think about this story, just generally?
Generally, I thought the story was cool. I mean, it's a kid's book, but I thought it did such a fantastic job with setting up a kid's book. Like I felt like they could have leaned a little bit more into that, because I thought that was so well done. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, you have a goofy villain character, which, it's funny. But it was cool that there was this element of like, oh, I'm going to rewrite this book, right? I'm going to rewrite the story. Yeah. If I get the main character out of it, then what happens? I will say, I just thought there was some elements, maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but there were some elements that I wish they would have explored that a little bit more. Like, what does that mean for their world? What happens when the main character is no longer there? They kind of do. But there's another element in this too, and I'm sure we'll get to this. But the kid, the bedroom, the owner of the books, right? Yeah,
yeah. So when Jot is kicked out of the book, and if you've seen the trailer, you've seen Jot goes from this 2D storybook, gets kicked out of the book itself, and then he's suddenly out in this 3D world, and it's like Toy Story, right? You're in this kid's bedroom on this messy desk full of, art supplies and toys and stuff like that. And so you're introduced to the outside world. And one of the things that the story like hints at is like, there's this kid who lives, in this house, and he owns the book and he owns all the toys and he loves Jot. He has, a Plucky Squire lunchbox and he's drawing pictures of him and stuff like that. What is all of this going to mean? If Humpgrump fucks up the story in the book and turns it evil, what's it going to mean for the kid and the outside world? And I thought that they were going to set up some kind of Toy Story type situation. And that one of the biggest complaints I had about this story, because you're right, it is a very simple story at the end of the day. One of the reasons one of the parts where it like could have been more than that is if they explored this relationship between the book and the outside world and like the people living in the house and the kid who owns the book. What happens if Jot is framed as not the hero and this kid sees that his role model, his favorite hero, is not, like, he's not the hero of the book. He's evil in the book once Humpgrump messes it all up. Like, how could this be explored? And they just don't do anything with that at all. It's one of, like, for as simple as the story is, it's hard to really be disappointed in a lot, I feel like. But this is one easily identifiable thing where I was like, I want to know more about this, and they never touched it again. Very disappointing on that front.
Yeah, I feel like there was one moment, though, that they were going to explore it. I felt like they were going to explore it because he gets out of the world and everything's drab. Everything's like out of his book, right? And he's in like the real world and everything's dark. And I think even like one of the characters that he runs into, because there's characters he runs into outside the storybook as well. I think they make a mention even of like, oh, like this world is very dark now. And I thought maybe this is going to tie into, maybe this kid is getting older and he has his teenage years and maybe he's struggling with anxiety or depression or something. But there's nothing. It's like nothing. They showed this world that was drab, but they don't really explain like the effects that it had on this kid, whether he be still a young kid. I think he's around 10 when this. I don't even know. I don't even know if he's aging in any of the story, right?
I couldn't tell you either. Yeah.
And at some points I thought maybe he was the one that wrote these books. Like maybe he had the first book, but then he wrote other books. But none of that was ever explored. And it was just so that was the moment that I thought, if this game is going to go somewhere, this is where it's going to go. Right. Mm-hmm. And this is what's going to make this experience even going to go beyond just a simple story. It's going to be talking about like how this affects, how does a teenager deal with a hero that may have fallen or is betrayed or something like that. And none of that happened. And it was just disappointing.
Yeah. It almost feels like they had the idea of it. They wanted to mention it. And then they, ran out of time or money or just couldn't figure out a way to like make it all fit together and then just kind of like abandoned that thread at some point, because they definitely set it up as like what happens in the book affects the outside world in a way that like would be really bad if Jot was not able to go in and fix this. But it's never really explored again. So as it stands, like, again, this story ends up being fairly predictable. I mean, you know where it's going, right? Like, I'm not going to say what happens at the end, but like, it's a fairy tale. Everything's, you know where this is going. There's no real subversion of anything. The only cool thing that happens is that kind of meta element of Jot being kicked out of the book and then figuring out a way to like then manipulate the book and stuff like that. But it affects the story in that it allows Jot to be the hero in a new way as opposed to his old stories. But that's really it. Like, I kind of wrote down that this game, the story, is about charm more than exploration of themes, which is very in line with some children's stories, not all of them. A lot of children's stories will really hammer on something. I don't feel like this game did. I mean, every story has themes for sure, but not in a way that I want to. That's why we're not doing a spoiler section in this podcast. Yeah. Like it really is just, at the end of the day, it is a very charming but straightforward story. There are characters that you meet. There's like, there's the hip hop dancing wizard that you meet. There's Jot's friends that you travel with. None of them are really noteworthy characters. They're just kind of like little charming personalities.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what it is. That's why we keep saying that it's a straightforward children's book.
Yeah. And for a storybook, I liked it. I mean, my favorite parts were actually the storybook itself, not so much the outside of the world parts. There were some cool elements, but really, I felt like the storybook itself and just the artwork and everything in that. I wish we actually explored more of that.
Well, let's talk about that art book then. So, or like the actual book itself. So, well, like we said, the presentation is broken up into the 2D sections where you're inside of the book, and then 3D sections where you're out in the kids' room. So, talking about the book itself, the book is beautiful. Like the pages of the book, they're so colorful. The art is super charming. They really like, when talking about presentation and like layout of the pages, you have pages of the book that are video game levels. And then you have pages of the book that are like this game's version of cutscenes. But if you think about a storybook, you might have a full page drawing of a character with just a couple of, short little phrases or something like that. Jot readied his sword and prepared to charge in. And it's just a big picture of Jot looking all heroic. And the presentation and the drawing of those pages, it's really, really good. I love Jot's like tattoos when he gets blown up to like a full page thing. Yes. It took me by surprise. It looks so good. So when we talk about how simple the story is, that doesn't mean I wasn't enjoying seeing what was on the next page, because the visual presentation, and again, that narrator, he's so good. That stuff is awesome.
Yeah. I loved the use of color and the use of negative space in this game, in the storybook. Because like you said, there was moments where it was just a full page of them climbing up a mountain, and it was all like silhouette, right? So the background's purple, and it's him and his friends climbing up this mountain in the black silhouette, and then the rest of the page is all black. And I just... And there's another scene where like they open the door to a vault, and it's this yellow light seeping into the room, right, from behind them, and they're silhouetted, and the rest of the pages are all black except for that yellow beam that's coming in from the door, and their silhouettes, and then their shadows of their silhouettes. So amazing. The art is so good I'm going to say in the book. Okay. I'll talk a little bit more about the 3D, but the art in the book was so unbelievably gorgeous. And the other thing that I think they did a really great job with is that when he jumps out of the pages, there's that sheen off of the pages of the book.
Like that glossy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And it had that texture. It just looked so amazing. They did such a great job with the lighting and the use of color and the use of negative space. And I was really jealous because we talked a little bit about this, but I'm a designer, in quotations. I'm a designer. And and I looked at that and I was like, I could never build something like that, because it was just so beautiful and just so well done. The use of color, the use of vibrant colors, the use of black. I just couldn't, how much time they used just dark colors and then with really bright, vibrant colors over the top of it. It was just so well done. It was so good.
It is. Yeah, it's fantastic. And want to shout out the principal 2D art credit goes to David Hankin in this game. And obviously probably more people working on it, but the storybook itself, like this could, it would be a crime for them not to just sell this as a book that people could buy for their kids. I mean, I don't know. They could figure out how to turn the video game sections into storybook pages, but like it is a beautiful book. So I'm not an art book buying person, but if you or someone else are the type to buy an art book, the Plucky Squire art book is going to be beautiful. And I agree with everything that you said. And even the parts where you're playing through video game levels, they're presented as like Legend of Zelda type levels. Those are really beautiful too. And then when you start to get into that meta thing where Jot can jump out of the book, the effect of going from the 2D page to the 3D world, and sometimes like there's an ability you get where you can pop out of the book and then fall back down into the book in a different spot. So it's doing these transitions from 2D to 3D, and they're perfect. I hope it ran well on the Switch transitioning from that. On the PS5, it was seamless. It was incredible. I mean, this is the thing, right? We saw this in the trailer and we thought, wow, that looks incredible. And in the finished product, it looks incredible. Like, this is, we have our things where, like, yeah, the story is whatever, but like the art, the visuals in the Plucky Squire, this is awesome.
Yeah. The other thing I will say too about the book that I really loved is that there's some elements where you have the pages of the book, like you're reading a book, with the left and the right hand side of the pages, right? But then there's moments where the book flips, where the top down and for the bottom, top to bottom. It was so cool. I just loved it. I loved that so much. That was such a neat thing that they did. And the whole time when I was playing this game, I kept thinking, like, how this was designed from a page, like a storybook page, and just how much work and how much research went into just thinking about children's books and like how they're read and how kids like interact with them, right? And turn the books on their side and look at it from different angles. I just loved that so much.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Tate mode sections in the book for sure.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's great. 2D sections often end with you jumping out into the 3D world too. And the 3D art is very different. Real quick, art credit for 3D goes to Tristan Cheselet, I'm going to guess, Amit Meklovitz, and an animation credit, because there's a lot more animation in the 3D sections, to Jeff Trusler. So hope I got the names right. Y'all did a great job, in my opinion. This is presented in more of a photorealistic, and we use the Pixar Toy Story comparison a lot, so we'll just continue with that. Very, very high def models for objects in the environment, and enemy designs. Like there's bugs and stuff out in the bedroom, and they're high definition bugs. They look kind of gross. So it's a big difference between like this cartoony style inside the book, and then you get out into this like 3D, very high resolution textures and environmental models and stuff like that. Now, I really loved this section too. I thought this looked fantastic. I think this is a difference between me playing on PS5 and you playing on Switch, if we're being honest.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it was a little janky on the Switch. And I think it had to do with the Switch, which is fair, but also not fair, because like kids are going to be like, if this is a kid's game, this is where kids are going to be playing this game. It's going to be on the Switch, right? But there are some elements that I really liked. When I first jumped out of the world, one of the cool things is that we talked about this, but he has a messy desk. The kid has a messy desk, and there's all these art supplies, and a lot of the art supplies there's some stickers and some other things that are like in Chinese. And I tried to, maybe it's not Chinese, but it was the kanji kind of script, right? And I was trying to translate some of that to see like if there's meaning behind that. There's not. There wasn't.
Maybe like that's why ARG hidden in the objects there.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe that's why I spent 15 hours into this game, because I was trying to find more meaning into that stuff. But there are some really cool elements. Like I do like the fact that the level design was really cool. Like some of the level designs. So I will say they kind of got old after a while, and kind of, I've seen this before, right? We've seen this. You have to climb up the side of a building, or side of some blocks. But there's some cool elements where like you jump into a mug and then you run across the mug and you're going around the mug. That was neat. There's also like a dinosaur one, which I thought was really neat. So there's some really neat elements within that 3D world. But I think you're probably right. It probably was a Switch. It just felt more janky than the storybook parts.
Yeah, just, reading your notes and stuff, and, talking about things not just looking a bit more sloppy or being a bit more janky. I did not experience that on PS5. So that just sounds like this game is too high res for the Switch, just straight up. So we are at that point in the Switch's life cycle where you like, high res 3D game, maybe not. So it is unfortunate because you're right. Like if kids likely would be playing on this on a Switch more often than on a PS5 or a PC or something like that. So I like that you mentioned the attention to detail in those things out in the 3D environment, though, like those those tubes of paint and the art supplies and the pencils and the little post-it notes with stuff on it and stuff like that. All of that has a like not like full tubes of paint either, like scrunched up tubes of paint with like little spilled paint on the outsides and stuff like that. Like someone has used this stuff and they really had a great attention to detail there. So I loved, like you said, even if you're going through at hour 7 doing something outside of the book or hour 15 and you've seen it before, like you're not wowed by the graphics in the 3D area anymore. The little details they put on the stuff out there, especially the stuff that you interact with, is consistently really, really great, I thought. So it did bring back those very nostalgic Toy Story vibes for me. I actually played Tinykin like right after I played this. So like 2 straight games of, being shrunken down in the human world. So I just really enjoy that. That might just be a mark for this type of environment in a video game. One other thing just to mention about the 3D environment. This game seemingly takes place over the course of like one evening into night. And the lighting change in the 3D, because this table that the game takes place on is right next to a window. And so the change in the lighting between like the late afternoon into the evening, into the night, and the way that that's all rendered out into this 3D environment on the desk is so good. It's really beautiful. So yeah, I'm just, call me simple, call me a mark for anything like this. Great lighting is something I always love. And especially modern games, it's one thing that I really, really appreciate about modern technology is that we can have lighting like this all the time now. So yeah, I really enjoyed these 3D parts. The gameplay got a little bit like tired in them from time to time, but I never got tired of looking at it, we'll say.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that the gameplay got a little tiresome. The one thing that was interesting, I don't know if you tried this, but you mentioned how like all the art supplies, there's like paint out and there's, goose, like globs of paint all over, right? I tried I walked through it expecting that I would track paint all over the place, and that didn't happen. And that, to me, it made it feel a little stale. Like that kind of took away a little bit of that magic of like, oh, this is not this is not real, unless that paint's been sitting there for years and years and years. It's just so crusty,
right?
So that was one thing that I was a little disappointed in, that I was expecting a little bit more in regards to the environment and interacting with the environment and seeing like what Jot might do and like how it might affect the environment, and that didn't really happen.
Yeah, when we say the environments and stuff, these are video game levels that are laid out for Jot to make progress through. They don't, like no kid is going to stack up the blocks and stuff to make this level. So it is a little bit of like this is all made for Jot type of thing, but I still enjoyed the way it looks. The music is credited to Mike Georgiades. Pronunciation. This is what I get for trying to give people credit for their work. I don't have a lot to say about the music. Plucky is in the title, and it's also a word that I would use to describe the music. It's, for the most part, a very upbeat, kind of adventurous type of soundtrack that really fits, you're on an adventure in this game, in this children's story, and there's some dark sections and the music gets foreboding and dark, but for the most part, it is just a charming soundtrack. I was listening to it preparing for this episode, and it is a nice, pleasant listen. I just don't have a whole lot else to say about it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the music is really good. There was a lot of elements in the music that tied into like the levels that were being played. For instance, that mouse, where the mouse had to sneak around and not get caught, right? And he puts on these shades and he kind of does this thing with his rim of his hat. He's like, and it's this very jazzy music that's playing. And I loved
Yeah.
that. I loved that element of that. It felt like there was a lot of intention around the music that's playing and the levels that you're playing in.
Yeah. Like one of the things we'll talk about in the gameplay section is how they mix up the gameplay with different stuff, like that stealth level you mentioned, or like little mini games and stuff. And the music always fits really well with that. I'm thinking of like there's a rhythm game section that you do, and like the music is really great in that. And they introduce electric guitars into the part where, you know, you're playing as the character who would most be identified by an electric guitar if you're going to assign an instrument to them. So that stuff is good. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So let's take a break. Let's listen to some of that music. We will come back and talk about what it's like to play the Plucky Squire. So the standard gameplay in the Plucky Squire is hack and slash sword combat in both the 2D and the 3D sections. So in the 2D, it is most akin to a top-down Legend of Zelda type game. You have a jump, you can throw, you can swing your sword, you can unlock a sword throw, a spin attack, and you have a dodge roll. That's basically it. There's no block, but you don't need one. It's really a very easy game. And then when you transition to 3D, all of those attacks make the transition to 3D with you. And they're more animated, but it's the same toolkit. So, you know, I don't know how much of a logistical challenge this is to design the same game in 2D and 3D, but it never felt like the two sections were that different, which I think is a good thing for what this game is. You don't have to learn how to play a different game once you go into the 3D world.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there was one thing that was a little bit different. The sneaking around, when Jot had to sneak around in the 3D world. There was none of that in the 2D world though, right?
I don't think so. Yeah, because out in the 3D world, I think it's before Jot gets his sword.
Yeah.
And you have to sneak around or these beetles will like just like savagely eat you if they catch you.
Yeah, I didn't really like that part.
Yeah.
Someone
tell this kid to clean his room. He's got fucking beetles infesting his art desk. Like, what's going on, man?
And I think even like the game kind of alludes to that, where it's like, we don't know why he has these beetles here. He just likes to collect them and put them in mazes. Yeah, I don't really understand. Yeah, so that was a little bit different. And it's interesting because that's one of the first things that you have to deal with in the 3D world is sneaking around without your sword. And then later in the game, when the tables turn and he doesn't have his sword anymore, they do explore that again. Where you have to, so it's kind of a neat, lack of a better term, a bookend on both sides of this this mechanic that you had to use in the beginning of the game. It applies again later on. But yeah, I mean, it is pretty impressive that the same techniques that you are using in the 2D world, you're using in a 3D world. Outside of a couple of things, like in the 3D world, there's a couple other things, and I don't really want to talk too much about it because I might give away the ending. But yeah, it was a neat thing. Yeah.
So the basic gameplay is you're kind of running around doing this Legend of Zelda stuff, hit stuff with your sword, solving some puzzles. We'll talk about the puzzles in a second. One of the big things that this game does when you get to any kind of like climax or the end of a chapter, a boss fight or something like that, is it will give you these kind of one-off mini games to play. So there's a Rhythm Heaven-esque game where you're fighting a boss by doing this rhythm game. There's a match 3, there's a wizard battle that you do, and it's done by doing a match 3 game against this wizard, which I thought was pretty cool. There is a punch out mini game. There's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. There's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. There's a turn-based combat inside of a magic card. like a Magic the Gathering card, legally distinct Magic the Gathering card, I'm sure. But these mini games make up most of the challenge in this game, because I don't think I was ever challenged by just fighting regular enemies or mini bosses or something in that, sword combat. Some of these mini games, though, like I lost the rhythm game one time. I lost the match 3 game one time until I was like, really practiced at it. The rest of them I beat on the first try, but it was like a nice little like, oh, you got to pay attention here type of thing. And I, for one-off mini games, I thought these were really fun. I consistently enjoyed them when they came up.
Yeah. No, I think that was like one of my favorite parts too. And I think one of the things I liked about this was it introduced different elements, like rhythm games, match 3 games, like you were mentioning. And it's like almost again, like a little taste. If you're like a kid and this is the first time you're playing these types of games, it's like, oh, you want to experience what a rhythm game might feel like.
Yeah.
Do you want to experience what a shooting game might feel like? And even the mini games, like the rhythm game, I lost the first time too. I think I made it through like halfway, and then I lost. But I think a lot of that had to do with the I'm gonna blame it on the lag. I think the input lag.
That's fair.
That's what it was. The impact, the input lag. But it didn't make me start all over, which I was expecting it to do. Is like, oh, you'd start from the beginning.
Yeah.
It didn't. It
very friendly.
Yeah, it was very friendly. The one that I didn't like as much was the shooting one, the arrows, because
the one that I forgot to put in the notes. Yeah, I get it.
It was that thing with just those mosquitoes just kept coming at me, and I didn't feel like I could move my cursor fast enough to target them. That was the only one that I struggled with the most. I think I died like 3 or 4 times in that section, where I was just like, all right, I think part of it was I walked into it with this arrogance of like, oh, this is an easy game. I can do this.
Yeah.
Pretty simple. And then I realized real quickly, oh no, I got to actually play a little defense here. I can't just keep, shooting at the boss. I actually have to defend against these, attacks that he's sending at me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that happened with the rhythm game. Like, I've beaten Rhythm Heaven, both Rhythm Heaven games. I can do this in one shot. And it's like, no, you actually, you do need to like do the gamer pose, sit up in the chair and pay attention, and then you can get it. But I thought these were great as changes of pace, and I don't know if this is why they did it. It's probably like they were like, hey, I think, and should note, within the art style of the game, most of these happen in 2D. Within the art style, the presentation of these is also awesome consistently. So maybe they just wanted to explore that. But I'm thinking of like, what if they did Legend of Zelda boss fights? It would not have been nearly as fun. And I think these did a really good job of just shaking it up and making it so that you're not doing that same thing all the time. And so I really, really appreciated these sections. And I like what you said from a new player's perspective. Maybe it's a kid, maybe it's a partner who doesn't play a lot of games. Like my wife played the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out section, and she beat the fuck out of the person she was fighting, and she had a good time doing it. It's like, is she going to sit down and play Punch-Out? Probably not. But like, it's a good introduction and like a little hit of like, hey, this is some different stuff that like other video games have. And it's nice that they give you like a fairly easy Punch-Out, or, the world's easiest side-scrolling beat 'em up section to just kind of like go have fun. Switch it up, switch up the presentation. Often you're inhabiting like a different character when you're doing it. And I thought that some of these were pretty creative as like, okay, we're going to have a wizard fight. What do we want a wizard fight to be? And having it be a match 3 game where they're shooting little bubbles of spells at each other, trying to like turn the tides of battle. I thought that was creative and a lot of fun. So props for these sections. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth taught us this year that not all mini games are created equal. But I really enjoyed them pretty much across the board in the Plucky Squire.
Yeah, I did too. And this is another example where they bookend you get all those mini games, and at the end you have to take them all on again.
Yeah, it's like a boss rush of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was neat.
Yeah.
The one mini game I did not like was not the 2D one. It was the very final boss, which happens in 3D.
It was tough.
That was tough, and
Yeah.
I wasn't a big fan. And again, partly I think it had to do with playing on the Switch. I'm just gonna say it, right? So, but the rest of the mini games were really delightful. The Punch Out one, when I first got to that, I just had a big smile on my face because I was like, "Oh man, this is what this game's gonna be. It's gonna be fun things like this." It wasn't always that way, but yeah,
most of the time, most of the time. And I was like legitimately excited when I got to one of these sections. I was like, "Oh, something new is coming up. I wonder what they're gonna do here." And a lot of times it was a good time. So that's fun. And then the other big part of the gameplay is the puzzles. So puzzles in this game are really centered around that meta thing where you can jump in and out of the book and interact with the book in a couple of different ways. So one of the first major types of puzzles is that because it's a storybook, you'll have these little, phrases, paragraphs of text on the screen, or like a sentence or something like, the lake was covered in ice or something like that. And so you can sometimes interact with the words. It'll glow and you go hit the phrase with your sword and it'll be like, oh, I can pick up the word ice. And so you pick it up and then maybe somewhere else on that page or on a previous page, because there's a mechanic where you can jump out of the book, turn the pages and go look for words on other pages, which I thought was pretty satisfying most of the time. Maybe you'll go in the other thing and you'll find the word dirt, or so, I'm just making one up. So you pick up the word dirt, you drop it in the sentence. Now the lake is covered in dirt and you can walk across the lake. That's how you solve the puzzle. So like, it's kind of like thinking of a Scribble Knots or something like that. Very, very simplified version of that. But I enjoyed these, very simple. But once you get later in the game and it's like, you might need to go to the beginning of the chapter to find the word you're looking for. It always felt great where I was like, I think I remember that word that I think is going to solve the puzzle 3 pages ago. Let me go look. And sure enough, there it is.
Yeah, I think, and if you couldn't figure it out, there certainly was like the little mini Moonbeard character.
Always there. Yeah.
Always there to tell you, go to the beginning of the book. Did you pass a word earlier on? And you're like, oh yeah, thanks. I learned real quickly that if I just wanted to do the puzzles on my own, don't ever talk to him because he'll just tell you the answer right away. But I did like the word puzzles. I thought that was really neat. I thought that was a neat twist. I thought that in the beginning they introduced it, and they introduced it pretty simply, and then later on, like you said, there was like moments where you had to go back in the book and grab different words. But I don't think it ever got to the point where it got really complicated, where it was like, I didn't think it scaffolded on itself, if that makes sense, right? Like,
right.
I think it got to a certain point and it's like, okay, we're done. We don't need to show you any more of this. Like, you get it.
It got to a point where they were like, this is as challenging as we want the word puzzles to be, right? And, again, I don't know if they specifically made this game for kids, but it feels like they stopped the difficulty of the puzzles at a point where kids could still handle it, right? Mm-hmm. So they then introduce other puzzle elements, like Jot can jump out of the book and use these stamps to, maybe there's a moving object in the environment that you need to freeze. So you'll put a stamp on it that freezes it, like a saw blade or something, and then you can walk through it unharmed. Or you need to destroy something or something like that. Maybe there are objects that slide, and so there's a mechanic they give you where Jot can lift up the pages, and so like at an angle, suddenly that thing that's on the page will slide down and you can walk across a walkway or something like that. And there were a few puzzles later in the game that I needed to look up solutions to, just because this is a puzzle game and I'm me. I am not the type who's just going to sit and stare at the puzzle for 15 minutes if nothing is coming to mind. I'm just going to look up, an answer. Happened a couple of times. So I don't know if it's like, I wouldn't say the puzzle was too difficult. Once I read the solution, I was like, oh yeah, of course it's it's that. Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
But yeah, they don't really, like, the last puzzles in the game are not a combination of every single thing you've been doing with puzzles, I guess. So they have an idea, they take it through its course, then they introduce a new idea, they build that up, introduce a new idea, and then, you know, the final area of the game is kind of like testing you on each of those individually in a way. But I don't know, kind of fun. Not as much like creativity and solutions as you would think that being able to manipulate the book and its contents itself would give you. Like I mentioned, Scribblenauts. Scribblenauts is way more open in how you solve puzzles than the Plucky Squire.
Yeah. Really funny. I messaged you at some point and said, this game's broken. I can't beat this puzzle. And I kept going. What I was doing is like, I was going back to a previous page. It was one of these puzzles where you had to close the book. This block would move to the other side of the page. And then I would go to a previous page and then enter to move the block. You know, I don't want to try to make it too complicated because I'd explain a lot of it. But just basically unlock these locks so that the block would move, right? So I can get to the other side of the page. And every time I did this, there's these walls these gates that would block you walking from back and forth. And then it would normally, when you beat a level or beat a bad guys, these gates would go down and then you can walk through the levels. Well, this gate just kept coming up every single time after, you know, even though I beat the enemies, it would just lock me in and then I'd start the puzzle over. And I kept doing this over and over and over again, thinking has to be the way to beat this. And to the point where I looked it up and that's how they beat it. The video that I watched is how they beat it. And I was like, but but the gate was staying down. It wasn't staying down for me. And I didn't understand it. And then I just tried a different way. And I was like, oh, this is dumb. Like, this is the way they wanted me to beat it. I don't know how this other person that created this video got it to work the way I wanted it to work.
Yeah.
Because it didn't work for me. And it was really funny when I messaged you and I said, oh, I got it to work. I said, I wasn't beating this puzzle the way they wanted me to. And you said, this isn't that kind of game.
Yeah. Right. It is, it's not that kind of game. And like, maybe making that kind of game is beyond the scope of what this team could do with this. Obviously, they poured a ton into the way the game looks, in both, you know, they basically made 2 games, right? And 2 renderings of the game itself. It is just not that kind of like open-ended puzzle solution type of game. I would guess that there are some puzzles where there are a few ways to solve them, but it's definitely, again, it's like you have all these tools to manipulate the book and the words and all of that stuff, but it does feel like there's one intended solution. If you like back your way into something else, that's cool, but like that's not going to be the way you solve everything.
Yeah. There was, and I didn't experience this because the Switch doesn't have achievements, but apparently there are some achievements that you can get that if you switch out words and like you make certain things, like instead of making it like rock, you make it wood. And it's like, oh, you get an achievement for that. Even though it didn't do anything for the puzzle, like you didn't have to do that, right? It just unlocked
a couple
an
of those. Yeah,
you did.
Yeah, it was like, you know, there's a statue of Hump Grump, and you can change the words to break the statue, and then you get an achievement for breaking his statue. But like, it's not involved in the puzzle at all. It's just a fun little thing. There are a lot of like, because you can play around with the words and do things that are not involved in the puzzle, just to be like, hey, I can manipulate the word frog here by adding a new adjective. So what's the funniest adjective I can find, and go put it in it's not going to do anything with the puzzle, but I just want to see. And it will respect the words that you put in the blanks, even if it's not related to the puzzle at all. It will affect the world. So like, I think it was like a tiny frog is taking a nap or something like that. And you can replace the word tiny with huge, and the frog gets huge. Or maybe it's the other way. I don't remember, but you can do that. And the object on the screen will change in the way that the sentence changes, which is cool. Like, so it is reactive in that way, in that very controlled way. It is reactive.
Yeah. The other thing, I don't know if you wanted, I don't remember seeing this in your notes, but the other thing, there is collectible items in this game.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Concept art is the main
Concept art.
collectible that you find, which for usually I would be like, really, concept art is the reward that you give me. But in a game that is so focused on the art, where I'm so impressed by the art, I actually did like finding the concept art and looking at it.
Yeah, I did too. And then there's these little characters that you can save. I saved
Yeah.
like 2 of them. I didn't save them all.
Yeah.
Some of them
Those
were kind of difficult.
Yeah, those are kind of like the optional hard puzzles, right? And
Yeah.
hard to the point where like I looked at some of them and I was like, it isn't immediately obvious what I need to do, so I'm moving on.
Yeah.
But if you do want to spend time, there are tougher puzzles to figure out. Yeah.
So I thought that was neat. The other element that I meant to put in my notes, and I'm sorry I didn't, was there is a leveling system in this game too. Leveling, because you can level up your attacks and such.
Yeah.
The one thing I had gripe about that is, and this is just how I play games, right? Is like I'll run into, and so there's like these little shops where you can buy the upgrades, and the way you buy them is by collecting these little light bulbs that you find throughout the levels, either by beating enemies or by clearing out bushes or something. And I always want to just I want to go to those shops and level up as much as I can. And I always ran out of resources. I didn't have enough light bulbs. I couldn't go back to that same shop and level up. I mean, I had to wait for the next shop, but sometimes I felt like those weren't available anymore. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to level up this spinning blade, even though I never used it anyway. But
yeah. I do get what you mean. Like a lot of times I would get to that shop and be like, oh, I'm 10 light bulbs short, but I can't, once I get those 10 light bulbs, I can't go back to that shop.
Yes.
I definitely did get that. I did finish the game with upgrading almost everything. There's a couple of art pieces that I didn't buy, and maybe one of my, probably the spin move was not fully upgraded, but everything else, you get there. And again, even if your sword's not fully upgraded as far as it can be at that point in the game, it's not a hard game. So I was like, fuck, I need to grind light bulbs to level up the sword. It's not that kind of game either.
No. And I realized that, but at the beginning I was like, oh, I got to level up this. I mean, if I have to level it up, I have to level this up so that way I can beat these bigger bosses, right?
Yeah, we play video games, right? They say level up your sword. I go, oh, I should upgrade my sword.
Exactly.
So, all told, putting all these things together, like I said, it's a simple game, but the individual elements I think were all fun enough that, combined with the visual presentation, which is really the star of the show here. But not to say that the gameplay was not to say that I was suffering through the gameplay to get to the next cool thing to look at. I thought that this was a pretty chill time. And, I made the Legend of Zelda comparison several times. This game isn't that much easier than your average Legend of Zelda game. Like, those games are harder for sure, but they're not that much harder. So this turned into just a chill time. Aside from a few of those mini games that I found more challenging than the others, this was a vibe out. I want to sit on the couch and relax and not stress about strategy or learning boss attacks or something like that to get through a difficult game. It's not a story that is going to challenge you in any way. It's just a kind of vibe out for me, right? For me, it is a vibe out kind of chill game. If you want to share gaming with someone who doesn't normally play a lot of games, like a kid, or like I said, I played a little bit with my wife who doesn't like video games that much, but the art was good and it's an easy enough game that she was able to play a little bit and we had a good time. And then I played the rest of the game by myself, but that's the way it goes. But for situations like that, if you want to share gaming, if you want to share the experience of playing through something with somebody who doesn't normally play a lot or can't play a lot of games because, give someone a PS5 controller who doesn't play video games, they'd be like, what do I do with this thing? Like, it's too, I think we take for granted how complicated a lot of games are, controls and, moving cameras and stuff like that. And the Plucky Squire is not really going to challenge you in any of those ways. As long as you know what buttons to press, I think it's okay for the most part. So it's, caveats. Know what kind of game that is the main thing that I would say. What do you think? Are you with me on that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I thought about this I'm glad I played it. I'm glad I finished it.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun. It wasn't like I didn't have fun with it. I enjoyed I enjoyed my time with it. The art is just fantastic. I love this art so much. The one thing I will say, I don't know if it should be I don't know if it's good enough to be up for a Game of the Year award.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a fine experience. I just feel like there's other indie games that probably could fit that in that category versus this one. That's just me though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this game is deserving of any kind of art and visual design award that it's ever nominated for sure. But yeah, it is. This is when I think about, games of the year or basically awards in general. I think about like, impact and like, are you going to really remember your experience with this? Did the game touch you in some way? And this game is not one of those, aside again from, it's an enjoyable experience. And then the art is fantastic. Mm-hmm. So I really, again, like I said at the beginning, managing your expectations, when we usually say manage your expectations, it means this game is not good, but there's something to like in there. So like go in and just expect like, hey, this is a 6 out of 10. Like bring it down. You might enjoy maybe the story's good, maybe the combat's good, but like the rest of it's not great. I've had some games like that on the show too, where it's like, hey, get your expectations in line. You'll find something to like in here. This one's more of like, get your expectations in line because it's just so different from every other game that we play.
Yeah.
I don't play a lot of kids games. And again, I don't know if that was the intention that they had to make a kids game, but that's what came out. And that's what this game is. And if you're on board with either sharing the experience with someone or just having a very chill time for yourself, I do think this game is pretty good. And like, I understand the people that gave it kind of poor reviews. I understand it. But with all the expectations in line, I don't think this game deserves poor reviews once you're ready for what this game actually is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that walking in, like you said, expectations is the biggest thing, right? It's not a deep, meaningful game. That's not what you're going to get out of this. You're going to get oh, that was a fun little read. Like a children's book, right? That was a neat children's book. I really enjoyed that. I'm not going to go back and play it. I'm not going to go back and get all the unlockables. Like, just not going to do that. But I enjoyed it. I'm glad that you asked me to play this. I mean, it was on my list anyway. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it, and I'm glad I played it. But yeah, that's I will put it on the shelf and and go to a different game. So
yeah. And it is an interesting game to talk about. This is the first time I've had these types of conversations on the podcast before, because we're usually playing games that are challenging in some way, and it's just not what this is. Do you think this game is worth playing if what we're describing, aside from the art, doesn't sound like something like, do you think this game's worth playing just to see the art?
I think if you appreciate art and you like design and you like seeing how people apply design, because this is so different than any other game. I mean, that's one thing I will say, right? Like the level design, the art design. I do think that this is a good study in visual and level design. I do think that there's some aspects there. And if you are a student of those types of things, and you're looking for like, what's a good example of where they used good lighting, they used good colors, they used negative space properly, they were able to blend that that 2D and a 3D realm. This is a really good game to look at from a case study standpoint.
Yeah.
I think if you are a fan of those types of things and you like that, I think this is a game you should play.
Yeah. If you're into the craft, for sure.
Yes.
I'm not sure that if you just want to look at it, that you need to buy this. Like you can, I'm not a person who can like get the same experience out of watching a stream or watching, you know, a Let's Play on YouTube or something like that. But if you are, you might just like check this out, see if it looks like something you want to dive into, keeping in mind all the things we said before. But I agree with you that like, if you're really into the craft of design and laying out these pages on a book and, you know, environmental design and stuff like that, like I think that you could spend more time taking in the details and like kind of marveling at it, because it is really, really good, as we've talked about before. So I don't know. I'm glad that we've arrived at like certain types of people that we do recommend this game to, because the reception when this game came out was very deflating, I think, of a lot of people's expectations, because so many people were really looking forward to this. So I'm glad that we've arrived at like people who we do think this game is for. And I was really, because I'll be honest, like the reception that came out really put me off of play, because I wanted, this was one of my most anticipated games. And this game came out several months ago now. And I waited until, you know, months and months later to actually play it, because that initial reception, I was like, ooh, woof. Like, do I actually even want to play this? I'm glad I did, because, you know, there is a lot to like here. I just think a lot of people got blindsided by what it is. As we said, I'm saying this for like the 8th time in the show now.
Yeah. No, I agree. I know. I mean, I think that's a good point though. I mean, yeah, if it's in your backlog, right? And I think we both were like the same thing. It's like, the reception isn't that great. I think you should still give this game a shot, just because there are elements there. I do think they are setting up for a sequel. And I hope that the sequel dives into a little bit deeper into some of the elements that we've been talking about. But yeah, I think it's worth a play. I do.
Yeah, agreed. So let's do our housekeeping before we wrap up here. So we always start our housekeeping by talking about the stuff that the guest does. So as I said at the top of the show, Roger is one of the people involved with the Gamerheads podcast and the Gamerheads website, game reviews and news and stuff like that. So tell everybody about the show, tell everyone about the website and where they can find you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah.
So Gamerheads, we are a podcast. We started out podcast, and then we moved to doing written reviews as well. And we started in 2016, right around when the Switch was the Switch was announced the next year, but it's very funny. You can don't go back. Actually, don't listen to any of those early episodes. Please don't. The quality is not as good. But we do reviews, we do interviews as well. We don't do the deep dives like you do, and that's one thing that I feel like we should probably do more, like just take a game and deep dive into it. That's why I really appreciate your podcast, because like you do such a fantastic job with that.
Thank you.
But you can check out our website at gamerheadspodcast.com, where you can read our reviews and listen to the podcast. You can check us out on Blue Sky at gamerheadspodcast.com. Yes, because we have a website, and then I got it through. That's the really cool thing about Blue Sky.
Yeah.
So check us out there.
Yeah, it's a good podcast, and you have a good group of people working with you on, you know, the reviews and stuff like that too. It's a good crew, and like I said, I listen to the podcast, so it's a good time, and I recommend it to people who like this show. You made it this far into the episode. You obviously like video games and you like thinking about them, and you enjoy intelligent conversation, I hope that's why you're still here, which means you will enjoy the Gamerheads podcast as well, and check out the written reviews as well too. So I will put links down in the show notes for the podcast, for the website, for the socials, so that you can easily find them, and surely you'll find something you like. As the music is playing you out in this episode, go click around and find something that interests you. Gamerheads is often on the new releases, especially with indie games. So you'll find things in a more timely fashion than you will on Tales from the Backlog, for sure.
Sometimes.
As this episode comes out 6 months after the Plucky Squire came out. Yeah. Well, I appreciate having you on the show, and I want to send people your way. So, everyone listening, go check them out. And for this podcast, ways to support the show, the same as always, consider joining the Discord server and join the conversation. I know we've had some people that played the Plucky Squire, but if you want to talk about it this week, that's going to be the place. You can leave a rating and review if you enjoy the podcast, likes and comments on YouTube. All of that stuff helps boost us in the algorithm, so people will find the show, and that's what we want, really. I have another show you can listen to. It's called A Top 3 Podcast, where we do top 3 lists. We draft topics. It's a comedy show. I think that's a good time. And you can support on Patreon if you want to throw some money over my way. $2 a month is the minimum over there. You'll get some treats. You'll get to vote on what games I do on the show and stuff like that. That's patreon.com/RealDaveJackson. And Roger, thanks again for coming on the show and talking. It's odd for me to end the show without going into the spoiler section. It's only an hour and 15 minutes. We got an hour more to go, but it's time to go. Thanks for coming on, man.
Well, thank you again. It was really fun chatting with you. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and you have a lot of wonderful guests, and I'm honored that you asked me. I was surprised because, I was like, you have all these wonderful guests and you asked me to come on your show, really?
Of course.
But I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a great time. And thank you, everyone who has listened all the way to the end. As always, you are my hero. No spoiler section upcoming, so all that's left to say is tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog. All right, thank you for listening to that no spoiler episode about the Plucky Squire, and all that's left to do is to say thank you to the patrons who help support the show. And a big shout out, as always, to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zolgeek, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Fakori, Jill, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Randall, Jake Martin, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, David Stecco, Stefan, Drellish, Rob Smith, and many more. Thank you all for your support, and if you'd like to be like them, you can do so at patreon.com/RealDaveJackson. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Hello, my name is Aaron. I'm one half of Superpod Saga, a topical variety video game podcast fueled entirely by nostalgia and unleaded gasoline. Superpod Saga, we discuss a different video game topic each and every week. We have new episodes every single Monday covering a different video game topic. More than anything, we want to entertain our listeners and make you feel like you're one of the boys, like you're hanging out at a campfire with some of your best zany, caffeine-powered buddies and just talking about your favorite games and all that stuff. Stop on down to Superpod Saga. It's on every podcatcher there is. If it's not, let me know and we'll get on it. But again, Superpod Saga, stop on by.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back.
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.